KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan Bitch Tits Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today.
These old things?
Those old hogs. Those old fun bags.
Forget about that. I was going to go with Dagan Fisticuffs.
Oh.
Moriarty.
Well, you're wrong.
No,
that's not what
totally
I'm going
wrong
for.
About that.
How's life? How's everything going?
Everything's good. Yeah, I was led through a certain little meandering escapade this morning in thinking about just a parent thing. Moms and dads out there will be able to speak to this. Like, how do you, when it comes to raising kids, how do you lead a horse to water, you know? And what I'm thinking about is this, as far as your kids' talents, but also nurturing an interest in pursuing some sort of passion. I might have mentioned this before on the show. Like, my daughter, our oldest, Lilia, your niece, is really passionate about dancing, right? She does dance 4 days a week. I think it's 6 classes a week, including Saturdays. She's in a competitive dance troupe, so they travel. She's really into it, and she's all about it. But our son, Graydon, he's 11. He hasn't really found, that passion. It probably would be Fortnite if we would just let him run with that. But he's so... I know I've talked to you about this before, Kyle. He's so good at music. And what I'm thinking about is... There's this piece of music that I really love. I don't know if I ever mentioned to you before. It's a classical piece of music called Clair de Lune. It's like a classic composition by, I believe he was a French composer in the late 1800s. So he started arranging this piece of music, I think in 1890, and I think it was finally published in the early 1900s, 1905. It's just a beautiful piece of music. It's very unique because I find it to be very melancholy, but at the same time sort of optimistic and uplifting. I can't think of too many things like that kind of wear both hats that way. Mm. And I was introduced very Dagan-esque in my introduction to this piece of music, not in any sort of cultured sort of way, but through a very pop culture sort of way. This piece of music is actually in the Ocean's 11 movie, the modern Ocean's 11 franchise. The first one, I believe it's the first one, at the end, where the 11, conspirators successfully completed their mission, and they're in Vegas, and they're hanging around the Bellagio fountain at night, and they're just kind of looking out into the fountain. They're not saying anything. They're just kind of standing shoulder to shoulder, reflecting on a job well done, reflecting on their success. And then one by one, they sort of tear off and just kind of walk into the Vegas night, until there's only a couple guys left. And it's set to this piece of music, which I love. And it's kind of I love those movies. I think they're so charming and really cool tale about friendship and just good guys, charismatic dudes. I love that piece of music. So I play it a lot while I'm working. So Graydon must have heard that. And the other day, this was probably a few weeks ago, I hear downstairs on the piano, he's plucking away at the keys and he's playing Clair de Lune just by ear. And he's kind of trying to figure it out. Now, I'm not playing it at the time. I'm listening to whatever I'm listening to, Joe Rogan or something in my studio, and I'm hearing him do it, and I'm listening. I don't want to say anything because I don't want him to stop. So I'm just kind of listening. My ears are pricked, and I'm realizing, Jesus Christ, this kid could play. Now, he's not playing it like Mozart, okay, but he's kind of finding his way through it. He's figuring it out. He's hitting some of the wrong keys, some of the wrong notes, and everything, but he's kind of playing through it. And I'm realizing, Jesus Christ, this kid could play things by ear. That's a real talent. For me, musical talent is so foreign to what any kind of talents that I may have. That's the last one. That's all the way down the ladder for me. So I'm just thinking, how do we sort of impart some sort of passion for music? Now, he took violin last year. He didn't really dig it. We're trying to encourage him now to play an instrument, and he sort of took a shine to the trombone for some reason, kind of out of the blue. I just think he thinks it looks cool. Maybe it's a little offbeat or something. But he's also got this he's got like fall allergies and fall asthma. So not the best instrument to be playing like tuba, trombone,
Sure.
like not even the reed instruments, which would be a little easier, like the sax or something. Like I think he would struggle with that a little bit. So I'm just wondering, like, how do I, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're going to be passionate or you're going to pursue it in any real way. But how can I kind of encourage it without, you know, the typical kid thing of them digging their heels in and pushing back? Or, you know, I always found that with skateboarding, like I never really pushed it on my kids because I didn't want the thing to happen where they sort of just go against the grain just to be rebellious, which I think is inherently just sort of a humanistic thing, not just a kid thing. You know, it's like, oh, they want me to do this, I'm going to do the opposite, you know, type of thing. So not to push too hard or to press, but just to kind of introduce it, put it out there, you know, see if they'll be drawn, see if you could put the little stick and carrot out there and see if they could be drawn to it in any real way. But I was thinking about that because of the piece of music in the movie that we're going to talk about today. I won't ruin it yet, but the piece of music that Fight Club ends with, which of course we're going to get to, it's an iconic piece of music, and hearing some piano arrangements of that, I want to see if Graydon could tackle that by ear. And again, we'll talk about that piece of music in a little while. So that's what's on my mind. As I was writing notes for the movie this morning, I was listening to the Pixies, and I was thinking, it brought me to Claire de Lune, and it brought me to, you know, like, how do I make, Graydon's got some musical talent. Like, I wonder if that's going to develop in any real way, or if that'll just be a hobby, or if that'll just be kind of left on the sideline as he pursues something else as he gets older. You know, he's a preteen now. So I'm wondering, maybe I need the help of family musicians like yourself.
Yeah.
So push it.
Sure. Yeah. I think we can assist you in this endeavor, Dig, because I don't know like what his temperament would be on this, but he might understand that he has some sort of natural inclination towards piano, and you might be able to drag something out of him where you can say, like, we'll invest in lessons so you are better at it. Like, you understand it more. Maybe you can appeal to him in that specific way. I took drum lessons and I didn't like them very much. The guy was really nice. I took them for like 2 or 3 years, and it taught me how to read. I actually already knew how to read music because I played saxophone, but reading drum music's a little different. It's actually way easier. So, so I that kind of instilled that in me, and rudiments and all of that. And it's important, but I learned most of playing drums by playing the drums. And he might be a similar thing. By the way, piano and drums are highly related instruments.
That's interesting to hear. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't think that.
Yeah, piano is really a percussive instrument. So, you know, and you're like,
yeah, it
you're
makes
hitting
sense.
it, and it's
Sure.
like it's a rhythmic instrument. It's like
right,
bass.
right.
You can obviously do much more with it than that, but when you think about piano in a rock song, you think about Ben Folds 5 or something like that. I mean, that's a rhythm instrument.
Of course.
So, you might be able to get him to like he might. I always wish I took piano more seriously, because I took piano lessons for a year as well, and
oh, I didn't know that.
I in 6th grade or 5th grade, and I wish I could have been like Colin, dumb Colin. When you're 20 or 25, you'll be able to sit down at any piano and just impress anyone you want.
That's a great point.
If you just like, there's just little things where you wish you can go back and be like, this sucks if you don't want to sit here and learn this shit, but you'll be able to impress women one day with it, or you'll be able to like be the, sit down at a piano at the party, and
that is the instrument in a lot of rooms,
right? So that's kind of like another maybe angle to it.
Maybe that's what it is. Just him getting older. Not only the cool uncle introducing or talking, like saying, playing it up instead of the dad, the nerdy dad, but also like when he gets old enough to like acknowledge Ben Folds is cool, Elton John, Billy Joel, like whoever.
Right. Think about all the great rocking piano guys. They're a lot of, even Liberace and others, like they're in front. They're playing hard. They're the center of the band.
Yeah.
Big difference between a keyboardist and Billy Joel. Big difference between, a background artist and Ben Folds, or whatever. So
good point. But the girl angle is also that might also help.
He's not quite there yet, but that's a huge angle.
That's huge.
And I wasn't there at that time either. When I didn't know any better. Drums were obviously even better for that. But oh my God, girls love drummers. And I learned that really quick. I don't really know why.
Any musician, I feel like.
Yeah.
I totally lost out on any kind of chance of having that allure.
And it's cool. I mean, I taught myself how to play guitar and bass. So he might be picking up I'm much better at bass than I am guitar, but he might be. I play bass with a pick, by the way. It bothers a lot of people, but even though lots of bassists play with a pick, but
Sure.
yeah, so maybe he's just got that natural inclination. Well, he'll just travel around these various instruments and what some things might be available to him, and he might just be like, "This is the instrument that I want to play." I mean,
That's what's cool about it.
It would be
Just
fun to see him
musical
play drums.
inclination. Yeah, that would be cool. I've been trying
for
to
you.
encourage that a little bit, and somehow Helene's parents got hold of a drum set, maybe from a friend of theirs who was moving. This was like 5 years ago, and at the time we were like, we don't really have room for it. Where are we going to put it? You know. Now I kind of regret it a little bit. If we should have just maybe taken it and put it in storage until he was ready. This way, it's just another thing. He has, like you said, he has that musical inclination, so you could apply it a lot of different ways. It's kind of different than any other talent subset in that way. It's not like if you could draw, you could paint, stuff like that. Like musical talent is musical talent, and then you could kind of apply it how you choose, or maybe even alter it and change it and adapt it and evolve it as you grow. So who knows? Maybe I'll have you speak to him, see if you could get the bug in him a little bit.
Yeah, that would be fun. Music's a wonderful thing. And I think also once he learns, he might already inherently know this, but once he learns composition in terms of, and it's not just classical composition, but once he learns what the contributions of every instrument is in a piece, then maybe he'll also be able to find what he's most attracted to. I remember very clearly Mom talking about how much she loved bass I was in like 4th grade, I think. And I remember telling her at the time we were listening to music in the car, I'm like, I don't even hear the bass. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I remember there being a moment where I'm like, what is the bass? I don't even hear it. And then you start picking up the rhythm. And then that's like so in front and center for me that you notice, like in Prince's When Doves Cry, there's no bass line in that song, which is peculiar. And you notice that. But when I was a kid, I would have never noticed that. So he might also want to deconstruct things as he moves forward and figure out what the most appealing part of a song is to him.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah. It gives it more depth when you think about it that way, and you could break it down and you have a little knowledge of what you're hearing. Sure.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, my friend? What's going on this week?
Nothing much. Very busy. Dad was here.
How'd that go?
It was good. It was good to see him. Ramon was here like a little bit before
Just
that.
before that,
yeah. And so we just very busy. A lot of things to do. Games coming out. Tasks to handle. I haven't really been. Otherwise, haven't really been dealing with too much out of the ordinary. Really watching a lot of YouTube. I think I've been saying this in recently, but YouTube is completely extraordinary. I actually think the more I delve into it, the more I'm like, this is insane how much shit is here. But I'm finding myself getting annoyed when I find like a great YouTuber and then I'm like done with their stuff, and I'm like, you son of a bitch. Like I almost understand like what people get mad at me where it's like, I want more, and it's like, oh my god, leave me alone. And I found this guy a long time ago in 2019. I started watching LGR. Do you know him? Lazy Game Reviews.
Yes. Yep.
Big fan of that guy. I'm really attracted to like these old school PC stuff. I've always been really attracted to that, like old Silicon Valley stuff. And so I've kind of like gone through all his stuff, and then I found this guy, the 8-bit guy, who's in Texas, and he's awesome too.
Okay,
and so
I don't know if I know that one.
But it's all again like Commodore, Spectrum, all that interesting
old
stuff.
PC.
Right. Things that I don't know. I have no interest in watching things about things I grew up with. Like, I don't care. Like, I remember, I see like gaming historians, Super Mario 3. I'm like, I was there. I don't need to see that. I would rather, like I remember, I remember very well. So not that there's anything wrong with that either, but I just and then the eclectic nature of the algorithm and how it really does get to know you very well, and how completely schizophrenic YouTube must think I am. It's like offering me like, oh, you want a guy countering a scammer in India? Okay, here's a fight video of 2 Karens and a Taco Bell, and here's a video about lawn mowing, and then here's a video of a guy clearing a drain, and then here's a video. It's just all this shit. Here's Timcast and Rogan clips and an NFL thing, and it's like hysterical. Like, I don't understand. And the weirdest thing happened to me actually when Dad was here. It was on YouTube, it's Spotify.
Okay.
But I was talking. Allie and I were like, we're all sitting. You haven't been to my house, but there's like a huge island in the kitchen. We were all just like standing around it, and on my TV was just like a random playlist playing. And Allie and I were talking about. I was like, hey, we were talking about Tool, the band Tool.
Okay.
I was like, oh man, I really love Tool. Do you know that big song Sober? You might like that song. A good way in. And then I shit you not, the song came on next on the playlist.
So
and I have like a
creepy.
10,000 song playlist. Like literally,
Okay.
I have like a master playlist. I just dump everything into the same playlist. And I thought that was kind of weird too.
That's
So
creepy.
yeah, so these things are getting smart. It's convenient,
Oh, it's so
but
smart.
also quite eerie as well. So that's what's been on my mind.
You know, and the fact that algorithm or whoever they're curating that could keep up with your very eclectic, specifically your very eclectic taste and like the amount of variety of things that you like to watch and listen to, it's pretty crazy how perceptive that is.
Yeah, it's awesome.
You know,
And also how it sneaks things you've forgotten back in. It's like, oh, I haven't watched this guy in a while.
That's another thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, how did you know? Well, I mean,
Yeah,
obviously
because
you would
you
know,
could-
but how do you know that makes sense?
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah, you could get off on like 5 rabbit holes for a couple of weeks where you're very specifically into like 4 or 5 or 6 different channels, forgetting something that you were previously really engaged with. And then, yeah, it'll kind of put it back into the rotation for you, which is good for, I think, good for the YouTuber or the YouTube channel that kind of fell off your radar, but also just creepy. You know, how it kicks things back up to the surface, and it really is kind of dictating in a way what you're consuming that day too. Like, how much autonomy do you, I mean, you have ultimate autonomy, but the things that it's putting on your, you know, in your immediate grasp has some part in what you are, you know, engaging with that day, what you're watching or listening to, which is really, you know, it gets very Big Brother-ish in a way, you know,
definitely.
super sci-fi, you know.
Indeed. All right. Dig, let's get into
Let's
the topic
do
at
this.
hand. This is one that the audience voted for, and it's Fight Club, the 1999 film.
Very nice.
And I just started 10th grade, I remember, when this came out, from David Fincher, the director. We'll get into him. Starring Brad Pitt, Ed Norton, as well as Helena Bonham Carter, Jared Leto from 30 Seconds to Mars. Excellent to see him in this. I totally forgot. And of course, Meatloaf's in here as well. Although I didn't make that connection until the end. I was like, God, that guy looks familiar. So, Dig, we have a bunch of letters here from the audience. The audience voted on this topic. Remember, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia, early ad-free access to every episode of the show, the ability to submit questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas to our show, submit topic ideas, vote on other topic ideas. This is one of those ideas. And Ben Williams wrote in and said, you shouldn't be talking about Fight Club.
That's true. Good point.
But James Solar wrote in and said, Colin and Dagan, I work as a middle manager in food service, and we hire lots of teenagers and college students. In mid-2007, I hired a high schooler named Tyler. The movie Fight Club came up, and 17-year-old Tyler said something that made me feel 100 years old. He said, I was named after Tyler Durden. It broke my brain that this near-grown adult child was born after the movie Fight Club came out. I'm now sharing this with you so that you feel as old as I did on that day. Enjoy.
What kind of awesome parents did that kid have?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I don't know that Tyler Durden, somebody you want to name yourself after, but nonetheless, this is a movie I haven't seen in a long time, or hadn't seen in a long time. I don't know when the last time I saw it is. I saw it in the theater, because as we said in that time, I was just go to the movie theater constantly. So obviously Fight Club was one of those movies. And then I had it on DVD, but what I remember about it, because there's this Limp Bizkit line where he says, I think it's on Chocolate Starfish, so 2000, when he says, I've seen Fight Club about 48 times, I think is something he said. And I remember that because that really was a thing at that moment. People were obsessed with this movie. And I remember kind of being turned off by it, because I was like, I don't like it kind of reminded me at pretty much the same time, The Matrix, where it's like, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is boring and lame. And it's a great movie, but I don't need to celebrate it quite like this. Of course, Fight Club is based on a book by Chuck How do you say this? Palahniuk.
That's what I was going to ask. He was on Rogan, and I must have just been watching clips rather than the whole show, so I was really trying to see how. I have no idea.
I think it's Palahniuk. But he's an author, and he wrote this novel in 96, and the movie is based on it.
Sure.
And I never read the book. This is not about the book. But I'm wondering, Dave, what your familiarity is with this movie, or was with this movie, and what your early remembrances of it were. And if you shared something similar to me, you were obviously much older. You were an adult when this came out, but
yeah,
I don't remember taking anything away from this movie as a kid that it's actually about. And so watching it as an adult, I'm like, oh, this movie's actually a really great commentary, and I didn't get it. And we've talked about that so many times in movies where I'm like, I just didn't understand this as a kid. I did not understand the meta level. And what's so funny about Fight Club, and I think what's so vacant about a lot of its fandom for people my age at that time, was like no one understood.
No.
Like none of my friends, my contemporaries, were watching Fight Club because they understood the existential nature of Ed Norton's struggle. At least I don't think so. And I don't think I understood that. So it was fun to watch it again, remember a lot of the scenes, see a bunch of things that I didn't remember, especially at the end. I think the movie's too long. I think it drags.
Okay,
But,
that's interesting.
I think it stays around 20 minutes too long.
All
Clean
right.
2 hours, I think, would have been better. But other than that, I was really happy with it. And I know people really hold this movie in high esteem. And I understand why. I think it's really wonderful. So what do you have to say about Fight Club as we begin?
You know, it's funny. That happens to me a lot with the show. And I think that's one of the nicest things about doing Knockback is like you could get a new context just by revisiting something. So I totally hear you. And that really does make sense, especially for the age that you were in 99 when this movie came out in the fall that year. But yeah, for me, there's a lot to say about this film. I like the way, first of all, that this has been on the list for a long time and it's sort of dovetailed with something that the audience picked. So something that we all want to talk about seemingly, which is fun.
Yeah, that was. By the way, that's good because that's just payback for you picking things that take us 7,000 hours. Owned.
That's true.
We were going to do this episode anyway. Owned.
Owned. We got you. Busted. You got jokes on you guys. But it is an interesting movie for a lot of reasons. I think it's a fun movie. I think it does have that sort of blockbuster popcorn movie patina, which applies to your generation, you know, seeing it in the middle of high school. Just a fun movie to watch, you know, about guys fighting each other, this underground fight club. But I think it's one of those kind of cool movies that is a fun watch, both contemporarily and historically, but it also does have something to say. And I like that it is ironic that, you know, just doing the show, we're breaking the first 2 rules, which is hilarious. And something that strikes me is that this film, you know, the book and then David Fincher's adaptation of the book is really aimed directly at my generation. It's a commentary aimed directly at Gen Xers and very timely for me personally if we look back at the context of 1999, because I was fresh out of college and off on my own, living in the first place post-college dorm or college apartment. You know, my first place in the real world, my first real job up in Connecticut at an animation studio up there. And the first place I lived that was completely disassociated with college. So I was going through this, you know, I was new to the throes of that young professional thing, positive or negative. And, you know, for me, looking back at the movie again and watching it a couple of more times, a movie that makes you feel, at least for me, makes me feel like it makes me look inward a little bit still, even though the movie is over 20 years old now. You know, it makes me look inward a little bit. And, you know, it's that fun, stylish popcorn flick coupled with this maybe tongue-in-cheek and maybe not so tongue-in-cheek message from this writer and from this director, and also some great performances by a relatively small cast. So kind of easy to talk about. And you know what? The last thing that's cool about this movie, so many times, obviously, and rightly so, we talk about nerd culture or pop culture franchises on the show. Star Wars, Star Trek, indie, Ghostbusters, a cartoon series, whatever it is. This is a sort of something that's important in the pop culture lens that's really a one-off, of course, based on the book, so you could kind of couple it. But really kind of a one-off discussion. It's not a franchise. It's a piece of content or a film. I hate referring to things as content, actually. I got to stop doing that.
Yeah, I do too. I hate that term. I use it, but I do hate it.
But say a piece of art,
Sure.
a piece of modern art that's really beholden only unto itself. You know, there's nothing else to really judge it up against. You have that one piece of content and then it's sort of moved on. You know, we could talk about the directors and their body of the director and his body of work, or the actors and their body of work. But as a film, as one piece of art, it's really just a singular conversation. And I think that could be pretty fun and something that we don't do quite as much on Knockback. So that could be kind of refreshing, I think.
I agree. And it was strange when I was reading a little bit about it that they did follow it up much more recently, like the last couple of years, with these random like visual novels that I don't really,
Yeah.
that I feel like it reminds me a lot of Jericho, which also ended that way. And that doesn't really feel real to me. No offense. So I agree with you where it's just this one-off thing. It's, I hate non-sequential, weird spin-off shit where it's like, I wrote a book and it became a movie and now it's a graphic novel. And it's like, all right, man, like,
Yeah.
just
And
write
going
a
back
fucking
to
other
the
book.
well with
Yeah.
that much time, where that much time has elapsed, I think is a weird look. I'm automatically suspect of that. You know, you're just like cashing in on a name or you know, this is kind of a weird thing to be upset about, especially for the nature of our show, but cashing in on nostalgia, you know what I mean? Where it's, maybe I shouldn't, that's maybe a little culpable for that one.
Yeah.
But, you know, where it's just feels like just do something new. Like you already have talent, create a different world, you know?
It's easy to dunk on yourself like that, but at the same time, it's different. It
is different.
It's commentary because it would basically be akin to saying, the news needs to talk about unique things. It's like, no, the news covers events and our
Right,
show covers the past.
whatever it is.
But at some point, at some embryonic state is the creation of what is being covered. And that is not our job. So it is easy to say that there's a contradiction there, but it's clearly not a contradiction.
Sure.
I wanted to ask
Well
you this broad question, because we were talking about what it's about. What is this movie about? Because I agree with you. It obviously is aimed at Generation X, and I feel like the baby boomers and Gen X are two of the most interesting groups, I think. Obviously, Gen X is the kids of baby boomers, but there's something about these two groups that was like the most unbalanced, I think, in American history of change and self-examination. And I think we've benefited like millennial. I'm a millennial. I don't know how that's possible, but I am a millennial. I was born in 1984, so technically I'm a millennial.
You are. Oh, you certainly
1982, I think, is when that begins.
Okay.
Although when I was a kid, we said this before, we were called Generation Y for a little while. I didn't really understand that either. But so I'm a millennial, and I think we've benefited, and certainly those after me have benefited from a lot of this introspection about things. And I found the very beginning of the film to be quite powerful because there's that scene where, you know, this out of control capitalism being portrayed as an IKEA catalog, basically. And I think this was lost on me as a kid too, because I never went to IKEA. I actually don't even remember there being an IKEA on Long Island, but I didn't go to IKEA until 2007 when I moved to California. I went to Oakland.
Wow.
And so I think what was funny to me about that too is that, like, wow, nothing has changed. Like nothing at all has changed. And we'll get into that a little later from a question that we have from the audience. But what do you think at the top level this movie is trying to say?
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting dichotomy, this movie, because I know a lot of people say like it's a comment on Gen X, and Generation X was the first generation raised on television, which I tend to disagree with. I think the baby boomers were the first generation raised on TV. You know, our parents were born in 1950 specifically, not to blow you guys up, but largely by 1950, everyone had a TV in their living room, if not by certainly the early 50s. So that was really the first generation raised with that sort of TV in the living room culture. I think you could argue that Gen X, you know, with the television and with TV culture and being raised on shows and movies, I think we probably took it to the next level from the baby boomers. I mean, there was this more content with cable TV and VHS and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sort of hesitant to call this movie anti-consumerism or anti-capitalism or anti-advertising, because I think those themes certainly play in, but I think it's more of, for me, in watching it a few times now, all told, maybe trying to find some sort of balance in between, you know, what you would say is like the discontented young professional trying to fill their emotional gaps with stuff, materialism, versus just kind of hearkening back to a more primal, self-indulgent, you know, kind of catering to our base needs way of life, you know, and where do we find the middle ground in that sort of thing? But it did, like, this film did touch a chord in my generation, like when I was working up at Funny Bone Interactive, my first animation studio out of school, my first animation job, I worked with guys, a lot of Gen Xers. Some were a few years older than me. Some might have been a year or two younger than me. But I saw this film strike a chord in people, whether they had just seen it and responded to it and having discussions, while we were smoking cigarettes outside, or people that were like all in, that would like watch it every week once it got released on VHS or early DVD. And so I know that this film really kind of touched something in that group of people, guys and girls, and that, it was probably the first time we had seen a manifesto like that on screen, and kind of under the guise again of like this popcorny blockbuster type action flick. It wears that kind of disguise, but then underneath you have this other content of making these comments about society and the way things seem to be going at that time. Also very ironic for a guy like David Fincher, because he's known for his music videos and commercials and starting back in animation with a career in ILM and stuff like that. So very much in the throes of that, even though he's an older guy.
He worked on Return of the Jedi.
Worked on Jedi.
Yeah.
And Temple of Doom.
Which is
crazy.
Favorite indie movie.
A never-ending story. Like, the pieces of pop culture that Gen X grew up with. So it's a very interesting conversation, and I think carried through from a lot of the things carried over from the book. I would say things improved from the book. I listened to the audio book, so I kind of got a feel for the source content and the performances. But I would say really it's at the center of it's about a discontented young professional sort of running on the hamster wheel of being early in his career, being a young white collar worker who feels deeply unsatisfied and unfulfilled at his core. And he's suffering from a depression due to what I would deem is sort of a profound feeling that his life lacks substance. Just filling it in with the right pair of khakis and furnishing your apartment with all this crap and buying things and materialism and responding to advertising and kind of being the fall guy for, consumerism, basically capitalism. And, he's afflicted with this numbness despite those material possessions, just feeling like something deeply primal is missing. And, I think that does register with me a little bit. Like, I understand what the Fight Club, even though I'm not a violent dude, I'm not really like down for like graphic violence or fighting, and I'm a kind of a peacenik. I could definitely speak to that thing of my generation kind of losing ourselves or losing those primal base instincts, or just those things that maybe, some people might say like maybe Gen X, it was getting to be too preoccupied with stuff, and maybe they were getting a bit soft, right? Like, and maybe that was being raised by hippies, who knows? But I'm going off on a tangent. But I would start there with that.
Yeah. It's funny because, well, first, before I forget to talk about David Fincher, I'm always so attracted, because I don't know anything about film, as we say over and over again. I'm learning as we do the show, and I watch movies like everyone else, but I don't know anything about the art of making films. And so when I go and investigate a director, I'm like, I know this name. Who is this person? And I'm always impressed when a director, especially someone who, and this, he's old. I mean, older.
Yeah.
When they have a very limited filmography, because it makes me feel, it's what we were talking about with DiCaprio, where it makes you feel like, wow, this guy is laser focused on exactly what is right. And when I was looking at the movies that he directed, he's directed like only 10 movies.
Yeah,
and
not a lot.
Alien 3, which we'll get to at some point.
She's known for.
But then 7 is an awesome movie, also starring good. Brad Pitt. Really good movie. Iconic. The Game, which I haven't seen in a long time, but is also a good movie. And Great I feel like is a movie kind of like Squid Game, actually, that new thing that's on from South Korea. It's actually kind of like, it's about like a meta game that's injected in this person's life.
Have you started that yet?
No, Derek told me when I saw our brother-in-law, he's like, you're gonna love this shit.
Yeah, Lilia loves it.
And then Fight Club, and then he did Panic Room, which I saw in the theater as well, and that was fine. Zodiac, which is a very good movie.
Oh, it's chilling. That's a chilling movie.
Yeah, it is. The Social Network I never saw, but it very well regarded,
good
based
movie.
on the famous book. And then I didn't realize he did this. He did Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is very well regarded. I didn't see that either, but he did Gone Girl. And
Yeah.
I gotta say, I didn't read the book. That movie was fucking awesome.
Oh my
And
God.
and
Big
I'll never
twist.
forget. It was a few days. It was late 2014. We were about to leave IGN, and we already left IGN, but no one knew yet. And I was with Cheryl at the time, and we're watching a bunch of movies that break, and I was just kind of like laying low. And I remember back to back to back, these are the movies that I saw, right? For the first time, Interstellar, right? And then I saw Wolf of Wall Street, and then I saw Gone Girl.
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh my God."
Three
It actually
icons.
resonated in my mind for a little while, where I started watching more movies for a little while. I was like, "Holy shit. These movies are," and I would argue that Wolf of Wall Street is top 25 for me for sure. Interstellar is
Wow.
top 5 for me.
It's a
So,
good trifecta either way.
but yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there real quick as an aside about David Fincher. I'm just really attracted to people that do that kind of stuff. Plus he directed a little bit of House of Cards, which was excellent, and
Yeah, that's right.
prolific music video director.
Yes.
And he actually did one of his last music videos was the song Judith by A Perfect Circle, which is a really awesome video. And I love that
gotta
video
watch
because I
that.
always love videos that show the band playing. I feel like that's an essential part of a music video. I hate when music videos don't show the band playing, but you can make it into something more. And I think he really does that there. So I just wanted to give him a shout out on that
I have to
front.
watch that.
As far as the plot is concerned and like what the show, the movie's about, it makes me in an anthropological way curious about how far back this feeling of separation and despair goes back. How far does it go back? This need of fulfillment. And I suspect it goes as far back as people starting to spin off from society to do things that were not necessary to core survival. I think once people, so like animal husbandry and agriculture, so let's say like 10,000 years ago
Okay.
is when people started having problems where they're like, oh man, I'm not like being chased by bears anymore. We're gonna still die if we don't farm and get our food and stuff. But now we have a mystic, and we're looking at the stars, and something wells up in a person, I think, and that's where humanity, I think, spawns from. And this movie made me curious about, and it's an unanswerable question, by the way, which is why anthropology is so fucking obnoxious.
It's hard.
Which is, how long did this go on? Because I think one of the things about Generation X, which I find obnoxious, is that they do, and I'm not saying you, but
No.
the proud Gen Xers have often looked at themselves like, we're Generation X, we're the best. Everything that we've experienced is unique and all. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I actually think in some way Generation X is the first generation that didn't have to worry about as much as previous generations. It's another one of those quantum leaps. And so I feel like it's what I said earlier, where we have a lot to thank for that reflection that generation, that your generation had done, as I said. But I also feel like it's not necessarily so unique. And I think seeing that IKEA thing at the beginning, I was like, what? Everyone must feel like this. And everyone's married to something. He was married to the IKEA furniture and like the just needing things. And it's so funny, by the way, he's on the phone calling them to order things.
Oh, I love that.
It's so quaint. But people feel that way about video games or toys
Sure.
or cars or women or whatever, like. And so I think Fight Club resonates with people because it is incredibly accessible, because you can graft yourself onto these characters, or this character really, and understand that there's a schizophrenia in all of us, that there's unanswered questions, the unanswered bell in all of our minds, the roads untraveled, the choices not taken. I say constantly on Sacred Symbols, when we talk about game development, that an opportunity taken is infinite opportunities lost. And it's true. So it brings in a lot of unique perspective on the human condition. And I really think I related to it a lot, especially through Ed Norton, the narrator. He's experiencing his problems through sleeplessness, and I can relate to that. A lot of people experience things in different ways, but when something is off, and I think he says something really profound about insomnia and how, like everything becomes slow motion and like you're detached, like one level removed. And I related to that as well because I have a hard time sleeping. I think it's at the core of my psychiatric problems. And when I am able to tackle that, I feel so much better. So I kind of felt him living out this experience. I'm like, oh, I get it, man. I mean, I'm not in an office environment scanning shit and whatever, but we all
Right.
go through our own issues. So I like what you had to say about it. And I relatively agree that I think that the movie, I'm with you where I'm a nonviolent pacifist. I wasn't when this movie came out. I was much more neoconservative at that time, although I didn't know what the hell I was talking about when I was in 10th grade. But it has nothing to do with that. Because I actually think the fighting is just, it could be anything. It could be like Fight Club. It could be Basketball Club. It really doesn't matter because the dudes are just trying to do anything to feel.
Yes.
And to break.
Great point.
And to break the monotony. And the wink and a nod stuff, I think, becomes a little too much as the movie goes on. And I think that the movie stays, the story, I guess, because it's in the book, stays around too long and kind of starts to undo itself and becomes a little too meta and weird.
Yeah. But you could say that.
I will also say this real quick before I throw it back to you, which is I didn't realize, and I don't want to spoil it, although I don't think it is spoiling Mr. Robot. Mr. Robot is about like the same thing that Fight Club's about, which I didn't realize. Like, I have only seen the first season of Mr. Robot. I like that show.
Okay.
But that show is about going after the financial institutions and trying to erase debt. Like, that's what the show is about. Or at least that's what it was about when I was watching it. Was that like they're literally not trying to hack the companies. They're trying to get into and destroy their mainframes where everything is backed up.
Okay.
Because like they're like, you can wipe it all out and then they'll just go back to their backups. But what if you just erased all evidence of debt? Right? Like that's what Mr. Robot's about.
Is that series still running now?
I don't think so.
Or is it over? Okay.
I think it's over. Okay. And it was really good. So it's about how hackers are like coming together to try to like take down the financial industry.
Okay.
And this is like a much more brute force version of that. And I didn't realize that. And I was wondering, I haven't read about it, but I wonder if they were inspired by this because it seemed a little strange. And you know what else I want to say about this? And I'm curious what you think of this is this movie has serious DC Comics vibes. I almost feel like you're watching, you know, like the Joker, like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, where it's not really a DC movie, but it is a DC movie.
Sure,
I feel like that, where you almost feel like you're in Gotham.
That's interesting.
And these are like Batman villains.
That's
right.
That's really interesting.
There's a guy that's like schizophrenic and his other side does all these crimes, which he doesn't remember and stuff. And so I couldn't escape from that comic book-esque kind of thing too, which might
plus Jared Leto, right? Jared Leto's Joker.
Right. Which is exactly, and which is why which is kind of funny as well. But Dave, let's get into some of these performances. You had said, and you had mentioned, I mean, there really are only, and actually I'm looking at Wikipedia now, there really are only 6 characters of any consequence. And I would argue really 5, because I really don't consider Angel Face as really being a relevant character.
No.
But you have the narrator, that's Norton, and Tyler as Brad, one and the same. And then you have Helena Bonham Carter as Marla, and Meatloaf as Bob, and then Zach Reiner as Richard Chesler, who I think is a relevant character too. So sure. I would argue that there are 5 characters. We can get into Angel Face. I don't really think it's necessary, but we actually have an interesting question about Brad Pitt's inclusion specifically.
Okay.
And I wanted to know what you think about what James has to say. James Ketchum. He says, hi, bros, Moriarty. I was in college when this movie came out and remember being excited because I had the book and knew what I was in for. My buddies ragged on me so hard because Brad Pitt was in it. And they were like, Brad Pitt is not Tyler Durden. My counterpoint was, Tyler is the pinnacle of this guy's id and ego. Of course it's Brad Pitt. That's the commentary. In Tyler's own words, I look like you want to look. I fuck like you want to fuck. I thought Brad was the ultimate star to play this part because it held up a mirror to my own insecurities and who I thought I wanted to be. And then, of course, the film smashed all that. And that was the point. Does Brad's inclusion at the height of his power add to or take away from this film for you? This is a great question because Brad Pitt was
great observation.
I agree with him completely. And I think that casting is obvious, that you are going after the perfect man. And Brad Pitt, people still look at him like that. But in 1999, Brad Pitt was peak
Doesn't
man.
Get much more handsome than this dude, right?
When you think about Leo now and other guys and even others now, I mean, that was the man. Brad Pitt was man. I don't know if younger people realize that. I think they probably do, but Brad Pitt was the man. And I realized that I don't think I made that connection when I was a kid. I don't think I ever thought 1 minute about who was cast for what reasons.
Right.
But I think now, of course, of course, Brad Pitt. Who else would it be?
Who else?
And so, how do you feel about his performance and about this id and ego fight between the narrator and Tyler? And
I mean, who do you cast? First of all, for good looks, but not only that, like you have that Brad Pitt flavor of, that lighthearted but still somehow substantive machismo. He just has that. He has that swagger, but it's appealing. Like you want to be like him, you want to be friends with him. I feel like he definitely gives that off in the film. You want to be, you want this guy to be in your circle. He's too cool for school, but you're drawn to him. He's got that bravado. And then that just goes along with, he's muscular. He's got the perfect physique. He's boyishly handsome. He's like got the perfect bronze tan, like everything down. He's got the carefree attitude. It seems like he's not trying, but he's still getting everything he wants. He's completely satisfied. Like he's that side of this. He's that 50%. And, the unsatisfied sort of seemingly depressed, sleepless, completely unfulfilled. Ed Norton is the other 50%. So it's a really cool dynamic contrast. What's cool for me about Brad Pitt, and I love him, and we've talked about him on the show. We did Inglourious Bastards, and we'll talk about other things.
Nazis.
But
Killing
he
Nazis.
would go on. What'd you say?
Killing Nazis.
Killing Nazis. And you know what's funny? Look at that very dynamic, cartoony almost performance in that film, and he still has that very similar flavor, even though it's a very different role playing Tyler. In Fight Club, he still has that, that through line, that Brad Pittness that just makes him so unique compared to everybody else. He has that really unique quality to him. But he would go on to do two of my favorite things that he's ever done in the next 2 years. He would do Snatch for Guy Ritchie in 2000, awesome. And then 2001, he would do what I was talking about, the opening of the show, the first Ocean's 11 remake. And he's so good in those. But, we already had him in, like, he played Floyd in True Romance. We had him in Cool World, Interview with a Vampire, of course. Legends of the Fall, and you had mentioned Seven.
Right.
Already, he was already having that collaboration. That
we got to do Interview with the Vampire, man.
Brad
Pitt and Tom Cruise, come on.
And I think, are they playing that free on YouTube right now? They might be on YouTube Movies or something.
It's a great film. And you know how I feel about vampires.
Oh, and that's a great, Anne Rice, what can you say? Like, and that's a great adaptation. But, he has, I can't, it's like one of those roles where you can't even imagine somebody else being cast for the role. And interestingly enough, I know he was already kind of a regular collaborator with Fincher at this point, but I heard a lot of casting, sort of colorful casting stories about almost every other character in this film, but I hadn't heard anything about, I think Brad Pitt was like a main get. Like that might have even been the way, part of the way to secure funding for the film. Like it had to be this guy. Not only because he was so hot, physically hot, but box office hot. He was a draw, box office draw. But just because he's so good, man. How can you, and even now today, like even up to a few years ago with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like he's such an important component to acting. And not only like you hear about his, off the stage, off the set escapades with his love interests and stuff like that. But just more importantly, he just seems like a raw actor. The craft is really important to him. I see him as like a really kind of almost like Tom Hanks-ish in a way. Like he's huge. He's the consummate movie star. He's recognizable everywhere, anywhere you go internationally, but still an artist at the core of that, and you kind of get that through this film. And maybe that was, even though he did a lot of big things leading up, Fight Club might have been the start of that, where you thought, you saw you were getting something. I think Meet Joe Black, for instance, came before this, and that was a good film, and he's very good in it. He plays the Angel of Death, but this is just like, I think maybe realizing like what you're getting with Brad Pitt, like he was going to be special and he wasn't going anywhere, type of thing.
Sure. Yeah, Meet Joe Black, of course, and we brought this up in the past, significant for Star Wars fans because that was the movie which the Phantom Menace trailer was first attached to. And
I always forget about that.
And everyone went and saw
it
and then just left, including me.
But
All right.
Claire Forlani's in that. That's like my 90s crush.
You couldn't have even sold me on staying for that movie. Like I was just like, at that time I was in ninth grade when that happened.
Fair enough.
And on the other side, we have Ed Norton. We just talked about Ed Norton recently because we did the Hulk and the Incredible Hulk from 2008,
Sure.
which we very much liked. And what's interesting about him is this is actually one of his first films when you really think about it. I think we had brought this up already, but People versus Larry Flint, Rounders, etc., and American History X, of course, was the movie before this. But we didn't. I certainly at that time didn't know what I was really getting with Ed Norton. I think we understand more now. I think he's one of the great actors of our time, and I really dig his performance. I find it believable. I find it in some way sympathetic because I think we all again understand it, but it does come off as a little crazy. And I think he does a nice job even with the fourth wall breaking stuff. And this is where I really want to start getting more into the meta of the movie with you, because Eric Pena wrote in, and a lot of people were curious about this. He says, "Hello, boyos. Fight Club is authentically one of my top 10 movies of all time.
Wow.
My question is simple. The first time you saw the film, do you remember if you knew something was up with Tyler? In other words, did you have an inkling that he and Jack were the same person? Or were you taken completely by surprise like I was?" So I don't remember at all how I felt or what I knew about the movie. What I know is that when I went back to watch it now, I know, and we obviously know this now, and thus I feel like it's very much like The Sixth Sense or an M. Night movie where it kind of does ruin it inside, not ruin it, but it takes away from it. Fight Club is best seen the first time,
of course,
not knowing what to expect. So it definitely takes away from it. I don't know that I remembered, but I was watching it with an eye towards trying to see it. And I think that when you look for it, you can. I just don't know how obvious it was at that time. Like when they're at the house and Marla's there, they're never together, right? They're never all together. And on the other hand, it's strange because it's like, is Ed Norton's in the parking lot beating the shit out of himself and doing all these things. So it is a little strange, drinking with himself and dropping a beer bottle and all of this, like instead of handing it to a person. It comes off as both believable and unbelievable. But I'm wondering if you remember how you felt about that, and certainly now that you know what you took away from it watching it with that eye.
Yeah, it went completely over my head the first time I saw it. It's one of those things where you wish you could go back and say, I saw it very much like The Sixth Sense. That's a perfect comparison. I missed that too. It's interesting too. I never heard anybody say, I haven't met anybody that said they've gotten this on the first try. And the clues are all there. Like, it makes me feel a little foolish going back and rewatching, because if you're really paying attention, there's definitely something odd going on. There's also something that Fincher does that there's a lot of convenience in the first, I would say, half of the film where he conveniently shoots things or shows things a certain way where later on the reveals get more obvious as you progress through the film. So you should pick it up at some point, but I don't remember ever picking it up in my first viewing. But, it's done pretty well. I mean, again, there's a lot of movie magic going on, a lot of convenience, and as far as like showing things from certain perspectives, and like you said, Kyle, not showing all three characters in the same shot. A lot of the Marla reactions should have painted a picture early on, but really, again, it just went right over my head. But, I think I think it's definitely possible to have gotten it. I just never heard anyone admit that, which is very much like The Sixth Sense. I don't know that I ever met anybody there had to be people that saw that, but I don't, it seems like 90% of the people you talk to just didn't get it. The big Bruce Willis reveal in that film was like, one of the great Alfred Hitchcock like moments, in modern parlance,
Definitely. Yeah, it's hard to know and go back and unknow what you might have known. It would be fun because people always say that, like, oh man, to play BioShock again for the first time, to watch whatever for the first time. I'm like, I know. It's
a treat.
It would be. It's almost dystopian, like Black Mirror stuff, where imagine you could do that, but imagine it got out of control, or you erase things you didn't want to erase, or neural pathways were all manipulated and fucked up because people were trying to go back and erase horrible things that happened to them, or like as simple as like, oh, I want to see this movie again. Oh, I saw the score to a game. so I can go watch it fresh, you know? Like,
Oh, right.
and
But you could be super selective.
right. I think I might have something here.
I
But
think
we'll
you
see.
might have something there, actually. That's very Black Mirror-ish.
That'd be
I
pretty
like it.
cool. We brought up Marla, played by Helena Bonham Carter, of course, longtime wife of Tim Burton, but also an actress, of course, in her own right. Great actress. And the only female presence in this movie. And you know what I'm thinking about this is, by the way, I think pretty much literally the only female presence in the movie, like, period. And I feel like it's interesting choice.
Yeah.
She plays the role interestingly. This kind of slutty, loose, dirty, you know, like grimy chick that I think represents more of what Ed Norton doesn't acknowledge about himself. I know she's her own character, but I also feel like she's a part of him too, and represents a depraved part of him. And I like her performance, and knowing what we know about the end of the movie, you kind of feel bad for her, because it's like, holy shit, she's like the biggest victim in all of this, other than the people that might have died.
She really is. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that.
And so you feel for her, but I really love, and we haven't even gotten into this, like, I really think it is so clever to write a film in which it begins, or a book in which it really begins, that this guy is finding meaning by going to these groups where people are dying or struggling with addiction or something horrible. And then that he sees a reflection of himself, and he admits that her lie reflected my lie is the line. Her lie reflected my lie.
Right.
Excellent line.
Yeah.
And by the way, I said this over and over again, and I assume most of it is drawn from the book, but the writing in this is exceptional. And it really goes to show you, like, man, because we just watched like episode 2. Now, obviously, you don't want to compare a sci-fi space opera to a drama based on a book, but you want to talk about dialogue. If this dialogue was like, if episode 2's dialogue was like this, then I think Hayden Christensen could have worked as Anakin. I mean, that's how good I think the dialogue is in this. And he's finding solace in the fake healing. And I love this line he says where when he finds his sleep, he says, "Every evening I would die." And it's very cool. And one of the things that so I was watching it, and I didn't really remember anything about Marla, and I'm like, is Marla real? And I didn't know if one of the hints she is, but I didn't know if one of the hints was she is always smoking indoors and is always in traffic.
Yeah.
When she's talking.
Yes.
So I didn't know. That almost seemed to be like a MacGuffin, where like you're looking for something weird and you're totally focused on the wrong weird thing to kind of obfuscate from what's going on with Brad Pitt. And so I thought that was pretty cool too. And so what did you think about Marla and the performance?
Such a cool character. I love the character. I love also what you said about, well, really, you know, like when you get her, you know, everybody knows Helena Bonham Carter as Bellatrix Lestrange now from the Harry Potter movies, and she kind of cut her teeth on that. It kind of made her name after apparently being around TV and movies since like the mid 80s. Apparently she was on Miami Vice for a couple of seasons, which is really interesting.
And you don't remember her. I mean, most recently she was, I don't know if you probably have some audience members that watch it. I like my female period pieces, of course, but she's on The Crown. She plays Princess Margaret.
She's in that too.
Because they change cast every 2 years.
Okay.
So we're on the third cast now, and she was in the second cast as Princess Margaret. So she was awesome in that. I mean, absolutely amazing.
That's super cool.
But
yeah, I can see her doing that.
I was looking at her stuff, and it is interesting. Like I know her face. I've seen her in many things, but you're right. Like she's kind of just been around. She's been around for a really long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And she could wear a lot of different hats. You know, I guess you could dress her up a lot of different ways, but she's a great actress.
She is.
And she's got this weird thing, like she's very colorful, despite oftentimes, you know, being portrayed with a very pallid skin and maybe wearing just black or very earthy colors. Like she has a very colorful resonance despite that typical visual, I think, often associated with Tim Burton because of the collaborations, because of the relationship, because she's sort of seen as like this Tim Burton muse, right? She's got like a filmography. It's like half of his films, from Planet of the Apes through Big Fish through Corpse Bride. I think she's in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sweeney Todd. She plays the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland and Burton's Alice in Wonderland. So a lot of times you think about her in that very gothic sort of visual sense, but she carries that through here too, which is really interesting. And she has that very specific Helena Bonham Carter flavor. And I can't see a lot of people, like supposedly Reese Witherspoon was cast in this part and it was a go. And I like her a lot. I think she's really charming, very appealing, but I can't see her in this part. You know what I mean? Like it seems like it's really very much a Helena Bonham Carter type of role, you know? And I think, you know, it's interesting, Kyle, like seeing her as like an extension of the Ed Norton character or, you know, ultimately of Tyler Durden, or seeing her as this kind of an equal. You know, you have the Ed Norton character. He's kind of like enslaved, right, by this soulless, corporate, emotionless, apathetic company who's basically selling humans down the line in turn of a profit. And how like he's kind of enslaved to this job. He lives in this very beige, very whitewashed, gray world where he's trying to derive happiness from like shopping in a catalog and trying to fill those voids in with stuff. You know, it's very Gen X thing. And then meets this woman, you know, basically trying to escape or dodge the numbness by going to these like self-help groups, like cancer support groups or whatever, you know, sickle cell anemia support groups, whatever, and feeling like that's what he needs in order to feel alive. And that's what he needs in order to feel listened to. And that's the only way he could then sleep and sort of escape from that insomnia. And he you know, this a young professional, right? But then meeting a girl who's basically destitute and basically has nothing, like goes to these meetings just to get free coffee and food and stuff. But generationally, even though she's not living in this high-rise apartment building and stacking it with expensive, you know, or shopping with, you know, IKEA furniture and having this very respectable wardrobe and everything Ed Norton's striving for, she's the exact opposite. But generationally, they are in the same boat because they both feel extremely unfulfilled and are basically using these support groups to their own ends. You know, it's very interesting. Like they're different, but they're very much the same. You know, again, like almost if you take Ed Norton, Brad Pitt, and the Marla Singer character and put them together, it almost forms, like you said, one person, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
You know?
It is. Yeah. And I think in some way Marla grafts onto the narrator in an even deeper way. It's even the thing that's even more subdued, I think, inside Ed Norton.
Sure.
Than even what Tyler represents for him.
Right.
But I really liked her performance as well. And it was cool to see her. And again, Reese Witherspoon's interesting because I think it would have given the role more femininity, perhaps.
Yes, definitely.
But I don't know that that's what it calls for. I think she brings the perfect amount of gravity to the role. And so I was very happy to see her there as well. And we have to talk about Meatloaf. Courtney Williams wrote in and said, "You're too old, fat man, and your tits are too big." So we cast a bunch of big names or future big names in minor roles, Meatloaf being a prime example, whose performance really stood out. So I didn't realize until I was putting all of this shit together for like last night, I was sitting at my computer and I was putting all the inquiries together and someone's like Meatloaf. And I'm like, oh, fuck, that is Meatloaf. Because in my mind, I was just like, who is that? And eventually you accept it. It's like, oh, it's an actor you've seen many times. Like I always just kind of, after 5 minutes, I'm like, that's it. The struggle's over. It's just a dude I've seen a bajillion times in my life. And no, I was like, oh shit, that's Meatloaf. And I forgot Meatloaf does act. I mean, he's acted for a long time. I was looking at his filmography actually, and he was like an early, you know, SNL started in the mid 70s. He used to appear as a musical guest on SNL, which I thought was funny. And one of the people that he appeared with at SNL was Christopher Lee, who he just recently.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, he was like the actor and Meatloaf was like the musical performance.
That's cool.
So what did you think of Meatloaf's performance in this and his inclusion? And we could talk about Jared Leto too. It's interesting that they cast two musicians as those roles, although Jared Leto wasn't known for 30 Seconds to Mars at this point yet.
Not yet.
And that's in 2002 when that first record comes out. Sublime record, by the way, if you guys want to go check it out. Excellent.
He's really talented.
He's awesome. Oh, 30 Seconds to Mars' first two records are amazing. So talk to me a little bit about his inclusion and what you thought about his performance, and of course the chant that comes from his death, which I think is the one of the funniest scenes in the movie.
Now.
Although there's a much funnier scene I want to talk about a little later. But yeah, so talk to me about Meatloaf. Not the Meatloaf you don't like, but
no,
yeah,
not that
Meatloaf.
musician. I can't talk about that Meatloaf.
No.
Yeah, he's awesome. I mean, he's great because we know him, Gen Xers. We know him from, growing up, and maybe interestingly, one of the first artists that we knew from MTV in the early to mid 80s, because they played his videos so much in rotation that early, I would say by the mid 80s, he was like on a constant loop. And it's great because he's one of those guys that transcends from his musical career, very successful rock career, to, he's actually quite a good actor. And, he really fits the bill for that everyday schlub that becomes like one of Fight Club's / Operation Mayhem's head lackeys or early adopters, and he's, despite his appearance, you get all types. You get the young guys, you get the out of shape guys, you get the businessmen, lawyers, the meek looking dudes. Like, everybody is trying to like capture that energy of just that primal raw thing of like being in Fight Club. And he's like the perfect dude for that, and he's got the testicular cancer, and he's over estrogened. So he's got the huge like man boobs and everything like that. Like, supposedly that was like 100-pound suit that he wore that Meatloaf had to wear on set. Yeah. So crazy. Yeah, but so super good. It's
hysterical. It's totally hysterical. One of the most memorable things of the film. And Jared Leto yelling at him on the stoop is awesome. Disassociated from everything else. What it kind of reminded me of was, and again, it keeps coming back to G.I. Joe for me recently, but just like how you might imagine Cobra recruiting or something, where like dudes like, they're lawyers and they're accountants and all this kind of stuff. They're just tired of the shit and they become terrorists.
I love that idea.
Basically what
That's
happened.
Well, they have to. They are all terrorists, right?
Yeah,
and
they all end up becoming
obviously
terrorists.
Financial dudes and HR, all that shit.
But I want to ask you, Dave, about the consumerism in the film. Now, it's literally there. And one of the things I found interesting was how they used real companies, real businesses. And Rory wrote in and said, "Listen up, maggots. How many Starbucks cups did you notice? David Fincher hid one in every single scene of the movie." I guess it was a nod to the anti-capitalist and establishment themes of the movie, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts. I didn't know that. I saw a lot of them, but I didn't know it was like in every scene. But I will say that, and I remarked this to Micah because I was like, this is weird. Because I was noticing there are Apple products. There are lots of Starbucks products, lots of Pepsi products. And they can't do that without permission. So what did you think that conversation was like? Where it's like, we're going to use your brand as an example of everything that's wrong with American capitalism. And they're like, okay. Isn't that weird? I mean, I couldn't walk away from that. There is no way they didn't have permission to do that. So,
oh no,
don't you find that strange and interesting?
Like
that was like one of the most great takeaways. If you're writing a book, you can write whatever you want. Oh, Tyler Durden's obsessed with Pepsi and it made him into a terrorist. Like they can't do anything about that. But showing it is a different thing. And I was fascinated by those three companies being involved in something that is telling you that it's these brands that are ruining everything. So what did you think of that? I don't know if you drew that. Isn't that weird though? I don't know how that even happened.
It is weird, but it could go back, and I'm sure it does go back to this notion in advertising and in life that no publicity is bad publicity, right? Just having your name, Starbucks, Krispy Kreme, Apple, IKEA, Volkswagen, I think it's Heineken, BMW, like it doesn't matter. Because I think people, if you put Rolex into this, if you put Cartier, if you put Brooks Brothers, like the Nordstrom, whatever, like people have a perception of brands anyway, right? I think any advertiser, any corporate structure will tell you that, you know what I mean? So it's just have your name in there. It's product placement, that again, returning to that philosophy of no publicity is bad. That just having it in there is enough. And it lends credence to the reality of the film or what messages are being sent, because you don't have to use, a fake, it doesn't have to be Starbucks, You know, it could be actual Starbucks with the logo. It could be BMW with the logo. You know what I mean? Like that's really the way to do it. That's what kind of drives the point home. So it's super, I love that. And I love, it feels very, he already talked about this conversation, feels very 90s to me. We talked about Ben Folds. We mentioned The Matrix. We mentioned Limp Bizkit. We mentioned Krispy Kreme. It's like very, everything feels very 90s to me. Mm-hmm. And it's so besides this movie, I think being pretty timeless, definitely capturing a feel with young Gen Xers leaving college and going into the real world type of thing, at least for me. But I think it definitely feels very beholden to the 90s because of the companies, like going down the line with a baseball bat and smashing car headlights and going after the Volkswagen because it really was perceived as a very feminine car back then. You know what I mean? Going after the BMW because it's an $85,000 car and then saying, well, no, not that one because it's a little Nissan Sentra that costs $14,000. And that was a regular blue collar dude's car. Don't touch that one. Feels very 90s to me. I love that. You could look back and see, most of these corporations exist today, of course, but yeah, Krispy Kreme will always feel 90s to me. Like that's when everybody started sweating Krispy Kreme and Starbucks earlier in that decade too. Sure. So I love having the inclusion of those specific companies. Feels very timely.
The Late Nate wrote in and said, "Hey, Brothers M, just a quick question this time. Did this film inspire you to make a fight club with your friends? I feel like the interest in street fighting went up drastically after this movie. Did you know obviously I was too young, but did you know of any of this stuff happens apparently? And I've never been privy to any of it. A lot of this stuff's on YouTube now. I mean, there are people like fighting and shit on YouTube and doing all that. And I guess it's just above board, but did you have any interest in joining this sort of thing? And again, I feel like Fight Club could have been anything. I don't feel like it had to have been fighting. I think that's the most visceral and interesting thing they might have been able to choose, but especially because it's not about the violence. They don't. I love the Fight Club scenes because like they're beating the shit out of each other and then they're hugging each other and congratulating each other and helping each other up. Even like it's not about winning or losing, and they say that I think literally. So
no, right?
Yeah. So anything to say about this? Like, have you ever encountered anything like that, or even?
It's such an interesting thing for me. Again, like. The way this movie has you kind of turning the lens on yourself, not just again and talking about what we were talking about a little earlier and like self-analyzing your own materialism, which you had said earlier very well. I think like everybody's into something, right? Like I'm into nice watches. I'm into specific car brands, specific clothes, like Tyler having a nice closet full of like having a wardrobe you could be proud of. Having a specific set of golf clubs, whatever it is, having a certain guitar because I'm really into my music, like whatever it is, everybody has a little bit of that. I see that with myself with cars. Like I really enjoy cars and automotive engineering and driving and stuff. So everybody has a little bit of that something. But with this too, it has you looking at like almost getting it in a way. Like, all right, like I understand what's going on with Fight Club. And like you said, it's not about winning. It's not even about violence or fighting or combat. It's about deriving stimulation through like your own inherent, maybe deep-seated, maybe suppressed humanity, like feeling pain, experiencing victory maybe, but also developing endurance, going through that kind of thing and surviving, which is like tasking yourself with something almost like skydiving, but different. Like, can I stand toe-to-toe with one of my contemporaries and have a fist fight and get up at the end of it and walk away, and what that must feel like, how exhilarating that must feel? Or, surviving through like a bit of chaos because life is so ordered and planned with work and families and having meals and planning vacations. Like, can I endure chaos? It's like a return to being caveman or cavewoman, and how would having such a powerful thrill register? And I think about it in our lives, Kyle, like there are more, it's interesting to think of like this movie inspiring actual fight clubs. And that piques my interest a little bit. and I say this being like the least tough dude I've ever known. Like maybe never even had like a proper fight since I was a kid, like that type of thing. Just the idea of it, there's something magnetic about that, but also I think a lot of us have that in life already. Maybe we go to the track and race a car. Maybe we go hunting. Maybe we, maybe even something as seemingly innocuous as like golf. You know what I mean? Like we have things where we're looking for an outlet, I would especially think when you were talking about this earlier, it had occurred to me with hunting. That's a return. Now we talk about our base, sort of instinctual background of where we come from as people, right? The hunter-gatherer sort of like return to a very simple, survivalist way of life. It's not real. I mean, in most places in the world, in the Western world, at least for, us and most of the people listening to the show, it's not necessary to hunt. Go to the supermarket, go to the store, whatever, right? But people still have a passion, for instance, for hunting. Let's say hunting deer, for instance. Mm-hmm. So that to me is a smaller example of returning to a more primitive human endeavor, if not way of life, right? So that to me speaks to a smaller example of something larger, which would be actually having a space and the secret club where we beat each other, beat the living pulp out of each other every weekend. And I had never heard of that, though. Like you, I've heard the stories that this actually existed, and the book was in 96, the movie in 99 did inspire this in real life. But what I wanted to ask you was, do you see yourself then or now kind of going in for that? Do you think that's something you would be interested in some way, even in the smallest bit?
The answer is yes, but I'm not willing to deal with the consequences. And what I mean by that is, like, there's that scene where Jared Leto gets the shit beat out of him, his teeth.
Oh my God, he gets beat with an inch of his life. Yeah.
Not that it would get to that point. It was weird that it got to that point in the film for them, but I'm not afraid of the pain. I just don't want to deal with like broken teeth, a fucked up nose, stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think I would, but that's the thing, is that without the consequence, there is no visceral excitement anymore. Unless the consequence, the biggest fear to you is pain, which to me, I'm like, all right, I've been punched in the face. Like I have on several occasions. It hurts. It's a very unique feeling. I think a lot of people know that feeling. It's like a very nasally,
very unpleasant.
Yeah. It's like very unique getting punched in the face. And I've been in as we said before, when I was younger, I was in a couple of fights. I got the shit kicked out of me,
Yeah.
But I don't consider myself a coward. And like I said, people respected that I stood up and I stood in,
Sure.
And no one said a word that I like got kicked, because it wasn't like I ran away or something.
And that's as close as you've probably gotten. I would argue, not you, but you in general, most of us have gotten to that sort of base primal, way of life, hearkening back to thousands of years ago. It's so interesting to me. Like, there's this thing like, and what's the difference between like seeking a thrill? Like when we go to seek thrills, we go to Six Flags, right? We go on like the scariest roller coaster in the world, but it's a thrill because I guess in the back of our minds, there's some sort of inherent danger. You're doing something you wouldn't normally do in this ride designed to give you an experience, but we're hoping, and realistically, there's a 99.99% chance that we're not going to get hurt or injured on this thing. What's the difference between that and a thrill where you're going to walk away a little worse for wear than when you went in at best, right? Maybe you're going to walk away in quite damaged. Is that, can you weigh those thrills? And the other thing is like, it's fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating, not just in the movie in a fictional sense, but in a real life sense. Like the only real difference, I think we could all speak to, like, you and I have very cool careers, right? We get to do what we love to do. It's not a typical work a day, blue collar or white collar thing where we don't care. We're doing it for $1. It's very unfeeling, very cold, like get in, get out. And a lot of people have to deal with that. in life. And I understand the notion of like growing numb, or, where is the excitement? How can we develop, where is the feeling? How can we feel like we're alive again? How do we re-stimulate those nerve endings and like get pumped up for something? And the only real difference between, Fight Club and Operation Mayhem or real life, like Tyler Durden's actual real life that he feels really like encumbered by and, maybe a little claustrophobic about, is they're both, the mentality behind both things is like a truly hedonistic philosophy, like go for what makes you happy, right? But a large part of it in the corporate, young, professional sense is like doing things to make you happy via other people's perception. I got the nice khakis. I got the nice car. I got the high-rise apartment. I got the sick furniture, whatever it is. And the other one is seeking satisfaction through the exact opposite, by basically bucking what anybody else thinks. What anybody else thinks doesn't mean shit, and it's all about what I want at a very base level. It's both pursuing your happiness, but one is saying this is to please everybody and look at me, and the other one is like, fuck what anybody thinks. That's what's interesting to me. And that's what's really, I think a lot of us as humans in a modern age, and I say modern age, being like at least the last 100 years, right? Is like, we don't know what that feels like. We don't know what it's like in society now to say like, I'm going to pursue my happiness and literally 100% genuinely fuck what anybody else thinks. I'm just going to do me 100%. You could say you're going to do you and be rebellious and all that kind of thing, but that doesn't mean the same as what there's in today's society in real life as what Fight Club is saying it is, And that's what's interesting to me about if this Fight Club existed in my neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, it's kind of interesting to know, like, and it's kind of sad as humans to know, like, you're never going to feel that. It just doesn't work that way in the world. So it is kind of this fantasy element of like, shit, like even for a night or a week or a weekend, it would be kind of cool to see what that feels like.
Yeah. Again, as long as I could avoid personally, as long as I could avoid permanent consequences for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that makes sense.
That's not part of so that's not part of it. And therefore, I don't know how embracing I would be. I think it's ironic though that, and interesting that in seeking meaning, they embrace complete nihilism.
That's exactly what it is.
And there is no meaning in nihilism. There's a fine line between like Randy and objectivism, in which you live for yourself, and just complete myopic nihilism, which is what these guys, I think, veer into. And they use a great term. He refers to everyone as slaves with white collars. And
yes.
If they consider themselves slaves, then there is no worse consequence. I mean, what is the consequence? Death? If you're a slave, then you want to probably die. So, of course, these guys have death wishes, and you can kind of make those connections maybe between that. The sicker part, I think, for me, personally, is it would be interesting to see these things from, as long as everyone was above board, like going to these underground fight clubs to bet on things would be, to watch and to bet and to like just be there. Because that stuff definitely happens. And yeah, that would be as long as it wasn't like anyone was being coerced or anything like that. If two grown men wanted to go fight each other and people bet on it, in some basement somewhere, it's interesting. I like weird, dark things like that. It's my business. It's not your business. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it probably goes on, right? I mean, think of I think so. This is a different thing, and this is also terrible, obviously, but cockfighting, right? Where little chickens I'm talking about, guys.
Yeah.
Pitting chickens against them. I used to see this go on when I was still living on Long Island and commuting. So this is probably the early aughts. On Long Island, taking the train from the suburbs to the city for work, I would see it in the backyards of some of these places in Western Long Island and Queens, like guys in the back of like some yard or the back of like some building, work building or an office, industrial complex or something, having chicken fights. And like, it was like on like watching it on a movie. Like they were gathering around, crouching with their money in their hand and like watching the two chickens go at it. So this isn't like a primitive thing that we're talking about harkening back to like 70, 80 years ago. This went on. But it's like kind of like a similar thing. And I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does go on. But there is something I have to admit. Like I think back to specific people when around the time this movie came out, you know, being in my early to mid 20s. And I could think of in my mind's eye a couple of guys in particular that were really into this movie, you know, and sort of laughing at them and in retrospect and poo-pooing it a little bit. But at the same time, I got to say, it's pretty fascinating. And also you want to measure, I don't know if this is a guy thing or if this is a human thing, because it could speak to you ladies out there too. But there's something, even the most unfighting dude like myself, no training, no martial arts training, never having endeavored in that space at all, boxing, martial arts in any way, never really, I have no background in fighting whatsoever. I wouldn't know what to do. There's something even about a guy like me who you just want to see what you're made of.
Sure.
Like pit me up against another 165-pound dude
like a
with
novice.
a similar background.
Yeah.
And at its rawest level, what would happen? There's a fascination with that.
Well, that's why,
you know what I mean? That I can't
that's why
dodge.
that scene with the priest is so interesting, because even though it's kind of in passing, because
that poor dude.
Yeah, because he runs up and you kind of see what happens when someone, because he like runs up and kind of punches him, but like hits him like in the side of the face, and like I think that's the way it would go. It'd probably go that way for me too. The animal fighting thing is so interesting because that I feel like is truly depraved, because the animals they have no agency, right? So
yeah, and you're not at risk.
Right, exactly. And so I remember thinking it was wrong that Michael Vick did the dog fighting thing. He obviously went to prison for that, but
that was a big thing.
That became an even sharper point of conflict in me when I became a dog person, as opposed to just a person who was like, oh, it's sad that happened to animals, almost dispassionately. But Dig, I wanted to touch on a couple other things here.
Sure.
Craig Phillips wrote in and said, "Good day, gentlemen.
Yo.
From the moment the film starts, the Dust Brothers soundtrack is altogether catchy, poignant, and sets the mood from scene to scene, almost becoming a character unto itself. I'd love to hear your thoughts of the film's beautiful but unconventional score." And then he says, fun fact, Radiohead almost wrote the music to this film after Brad Pitt and Ed Norton reached out to Tom York with request. However, the singer turned them down, and the rest is history. Mistake.
I heard that.
Now, what do you think? You had brought up the soundtrack actually early in the movie, or I'm sorry, early in the conversation, the end of the movie. But what do you make of the Dust Brothers' contributions to this film? The soundtrack, to me, not the soundtrack, the score really, I guess it's both in this instance, is really reminiscent of the time. It feels, It sounds like, I can't even explain it, like you know, or there's a real rhythmic, frantic, industrial sound that is reminiscent of that era, and
good adjectives,
and perfectly captured in this soundtrack. It couldn't have been. It's so funny to think about Radiohead doing this. It would have been the biggest thing Radiohead have ever done ever, and that says something because they have a few really huge albums.
Oh my god!
But having done something for this film, I think would have been, for the mainstream, a really big thing for them. So it would have been interesting to hear what they could have come up with. And this was in the post OK Computer, like Kid A era. So
yeah,
who knows? But anyway, what do you make of the soundtrack? Do you have any further thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting to talk about Radiohead and Tom York involved in this, because I don't know if it would have sounded that much different. You know, I love Radiohead. I love, you know, their contribution to music, and very innovative and very influential. But the Dust Brothers, I didn't know too much about them going in. I still don't know that much about them, but I love the score in this film. Like you said, has that very electronic, modern, contemporary, sort of computerized audio flavor to it. And really, I think, helps flesh out the atmosphere of the film. You know, you think of David Fincher in general, you know, he comes from a very visual place with film, obviously with directing commercials and being a film director, and his background in graphics and even digital animation and all that kind of stuff. But I always think of how Fincher, especially this movie, late 90s, has that very gray silver nitrate patina over the top. It looks a little dirty, a little grainy. high contrasted lighting, and the shot composition is very dynamic, very thought out. It comes from a very visual place. And I think the music in general is sort of a nice backdrop to add to that very 90s atmosphere. You know, you think about, again, I think about movies that also came around this same period, like The Matrix, where it has a very similar flavor, and it lends to that, you know, the whole conglomeration of what the film, you know, the senses of the film, what it looks and what it tastes like and what it feels like and what it sounds like. And then, you know, I think, you know, we have to say the Pixies' Where Is My Mind, you know, the end of this film. It's such an interesting song, man, because I don't know that much about the Pixies, although everything I've heard of them, I've liked. And it was one of those bands to me where I was like, I don't know if these guys are from the 70s or if they came out like 5 years ago.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like one of those timeless sounds. And I think this song specifically, I think could have came out last year, or I think it could be, you know, I had no idea the song was from the 80s. I had no idea the song was from the 80s, or that the Pixies even started in 86. And this song, I think, was off their first popular album as they started to get big. But this song is so strange to me because it's one of those songs that would come on the radio that I'd be like, I don't know, like, when this song is from. It has a timelessness to it. It's anthemic. It's like, it's offbeat, but also very powerful, you know, and it does have that anthem-like quality to it. And I listened to this song like 4 times this morning because I was like, this is it's just a good song. You know what I mean? It's like one of those iconic songs. What about you with the Pixies? Did you have any frame of reference for them or fandom for that? Like, I really
yeah, they're
didn't know
fine.
much.
I mean, I wasn't introduced to them until college. That's when I first really heard about them.
Okay.
But at IGN, there were a couple guys that were really into the Pixies. The music editor Spence and the old editor-in-chief Hillary were really into them. But yeah, apart from what I've heard, they're fine. But I've never really investigated their discography, to be honest. So I wouldn't know much about them. I wanted to ask, since we were actually, just as an aside, since we were talking about audio-visual stuff, what did you think about the inclusion of some CG in the movie? I actually think that it looked pretty good. The intro is obviously very intense, but the spirit cave with the penguin, I think, looks really good. And the planes crashing in the air look really good. The exploding buildings look really good. I'm curious if you agree with the quality aesthetic there. And again, with Fincher's background, not a huge surprise that he would bring that to bear. But I didn't remember there being so many CG cues in the movie, and there are. So did any of them stand out to you?
Yeah, I know Digital Domain, the visual effects house, still around today, I believe, handled a lot of that with David Fincher. And I like how thought out that is. I mean, really, you know, he has such a profound interest in technology, his background in computer-assisted stop motion. I think he said he handled the AT-ST walkers during the Endor battle in Return of the Jedi, you know, where they had the magnetic rods that ran through that were computer controlled and all that kind of stuff. Really interesting stuff. And I think Fincher started out with Lucas on that animated film that I had never seen. Very avant-garde, sort of like a typical Disney animated feature meets Yellow Submarine, where I think it's called Twice Upon a Time. An animated film that I don't have a big frame of reference for. I think Lucas did it in between Empire and Jedi, or he produced it. He didn't direct it. But I love his background in just visual filmmaking and storytelling, and the fact that he's also at the same time very interested in technology, Fincher. So doing the shots where you're traveling up, you know, the opening 90 seconds where you're kind of seeing like the synapses and firing and the nerve endings and the human nervous system as you're traveling through. And then the garbage can shot, which was amazing, which I heard like took like 90 minutes a frame to render back then and stuff like that. Very ambitious with a lot of like translucent and reflective stuff. Back then, that was a big deal.
Right.
You know, we've come a long way in 20 plus years with VFX, but you know, besides just the visual effects, just having that dynamic visual texture in the film where you're trying to really make it as visually compelling and thoughtfully crafted in terms of shots as possible, in terms of composition. And what I think Fincher does really, really well, not in just this film, but in every film, again, you could see the storyboarding through it. You know, it's like you're assembling a series of shots to tell a story in a very specific way. And I think CG is a big part of that with Fincher, but he does it in a subtle way. I think he's really interesting. I always go down the director rabbit hole, you guys know, when we do these topics. And I think the cool thing about Fincher, maybe unlike any director we've talked about on the show in 3+ years, is that he has a style, a very specific visual style, because the visual is so important to him. I think the visual component is so important to what he does. He has a very specific style without being nailed down to one particular calling card or hallmark style. Really, it's not style. He's just a stylish filmmaker in terms of what you see with your eyes, you know, in terms of the visual component of the storytelling. And I like that. And he's got big balls, you know, very bold and a lot of conviction. A lot of conviction. And he talks about that. I saw him do a panel. I don't know if it was a TED Talk or something else, where he said like 5 to 10 years in of being a professional filmmaker, he learned like the whole dynamic of I'm not asking. It's like my way or the highway, not in a dickish way, but in a way of like, I'm steering the ship visually. I've learned a lot via visual effects and working on commercials and working on music videos. Like, I'm the guy in charge of how this is. Me and the cinematographer are going to wear those hats. And I'm not asking you. I'm telling you this, with conviction, this is how it's going to be. And I love that you see that in his films, and that he kind of walks the line between traditional visual storytelling like a Hitchcock, where shot to shot and the timing and the editing is just so, but also the fact that there's a digital component. There's a component of technology and incorporating the newest and latest shit, and not being beholden to any of those two things, but doing them together, which is really cool. You don't see that a lot. Maybe with a Spielberg, who's that's like the ultimate maverick anyway. But I think Fincher's really, really good at that. And, you know, I didn't know he was even exec producing Netflix's Love, Death, and Robots and the anthology animated series, because that might be a good vehicle for the idea you had earlier in the show, Kyle. You know what I mean? Pitch it Black Mirror style. Very Black Mirror feel to that show. Yeah. You might have something there.
That'd be interesting.
You might do it.
Dig, I wanted to end with one thing we got from the audience, which I think will be a good conversation to finish things off on. But before I do that, I do want to bring up just one scene that I have to give a shout out to, because it's fucking hysterical. And that is the movie theater scene. The scene where they're cutting, you see him cutting the movies. I think that scene had me dying. I was actually like hysterical. It's so well shot. The different reactions, like people not noticing, but then like kid crying and the parents like looking at each other. It had a very Willy Wonka feel to it, like where it was very, and
well said.
And I just love like like that's all you hear, like just a one shot, and then it's just like clipped in and it's just going. Otherwise, dude, it's so funny. I just had to get. There's nothing else to say. I had to say about that shot. I just wanted to. It was on my notes, and I had to write that down.
It's one of those cartoony sort of cutaway moments. You said it perfectly. It feels very Willy Wonka. What I didn't realize, and what I wouldn't have realized if I didn't read this, was like that was Fincher's way of saying, like, giving a clue, like some foreshadowing that this is going to happen in our movie. There's going to be a breaking point where we splice together these two things and look for it. Which I thought was interesting. So besides that, just that cartoony, fun cutaway that's very memorable, I thought that was it's very Fincher-esque in being so thoughtful. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Kyle, before I forget, that you had mentioned this earlier, is in regards to Helena Bonham Carter's performance in this movie and how good it is. There are other females. They're kind of throwaway characters. You have them in the self-help groups and in the support groups, and you have the one woman I could think of from the hotel. She tells Tyler, like, oh, you made all these calls or whatever. Why? It would have been better to get rid of all the other female characters, I think. Why not go all the way with that? You know what I mean? You have this very masculine machismo fight club lashing out at Gen X males, largely. Obviously, that's what this movie's about, that a comment or a commentation that you're getting too soft, you're putting all your stock in the wrong thing, like you're forgetting how to be a man, that type of thing. Why not just have her be the only female in the movie? You know what I mean? Go all the way with that. if you're going to do
Right.
that.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. Like that would have been interesting. Yeah, even like ancillary characters and extras, it would have been cool to, because that
Just
would have been
all
another,
men.
another hint, and
Yeah,
certainly
right.
something that's conspicuous. I think it's conspicuous enough that she really is the only, female character per se. But
Yeah, of importance.
you're right. It's an interesting point. All right, Dave, this is the final inquiry I have here. It's from Kickstand. He says, I first watched Fight Club in my late teens. It was a super captivating movie to me, and to this day, I really like it. As a late teen upon my first viewing, I found it powerful and was swept up in the movie. Edward Norton's character's existence resonated with me, what I didn't want my future to look like. I'm sorry. Look, I never intended to join or make a Fight Club. That's not me. But I found it to be on the surface an intoxicatingly masculine movie. Brad Pitt is iconic and has so much confidence, at what young guy wouldn't want to model themselves after that? But today I see the pitfalls in the black and white 1990s portrayal of Americans. Consumers caught between a cubicle gig and an IKEA catalog. At the time, before my adulthood, this likely shook the shit out of people who felt like Edward Norton's character, maybe either because of insomnia or depression, but hatred of the cycle of their life. It seems like today this movie falls on deaf ears. Consumerism is constantly reaching new highs. People are ingratiated deeper in the cycle and seem less free and more dependent on technology, as a godlike figure even. While this movie still no doubt resonates with many and is relevant, I think that some of the themes it addresses have sort of slipped further off the deep end, and I haven't even mentioned the cult stuff yet. How do you think this movie has aged with you? It's a really good question to end with.
Great question.
And thank you for writing in, Kickstand.
Very insightful.
And thank you for doing such hard work keeping bikes upright.
What's that from? Austin Powers 3, where they're like, it's Nigel Powers, Michael. It's a kickstand. It's a baby's arm holding an apple.
Yeah, it's a tripod. He's a tripod.
It's a tripod.
Yeah.
It's a tripod.
Mini me. So I really dig this idea that this movie's relevance is lost. And I mean that literally. Like, it was a fight and consumerism won. Fight Club feels in some way like a tale about a time when people tried to fight back and didn't work. It didn't work. Now, we didn't get into the whole terroristic aspect of it. I think that shit's all weird. I'm not even sure like what actually happens in the movie. Like, I'm not convinced that all this shit happened. I don't know for sure.
At the end and everything.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, did they really go on this like the biggest terrorist attack in American history? Maybe. In some way, it's cool because it mimics small uprisings we've seen, like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party and so on and so forth, and BLM. These things that have become violent sometimes, but not always, not typically. And as they try to find solutions to these, as we said earlier, age-old problems of listlessness, let's say. And he's right, because Starbucks is bigger than ever right now. IKEA, the guy I think that founded IKEA is one of the richest people in the world.
I'm sure. And
like one top 3, top 5, something like that.
I'm
like
positive that's
Pepsi is everywhere. Apple, I mean, when Apple was in this movie, Apple was nothing compared to, like, literally nothing compared to
more
what
money than some countries, right? That's how it goes.
Right.
Yeah.
$1 trillion market caps. It's interesting to look at it through the lens of what Kickstand wrote in here, because it reads like war correspondence now, right? Like, oh, it's dispatches from the front. And Gen X is not in their 20s anymore. We're on to different things now. So how in terms of his question, he asks, how do you think this movie has aged with you?
Yeah.
What do you think about what he has to say here about it kind of being a relic?
There is a timelessness to it again, and I know this heavily applies to Gen Xers, especially with, we came out of the baby boomer generation. A lot of our parents were hippies, quote unquote. I think it's interesting for Gen X because I think we might be the first generation to, in our younger years, in our teens and 20s, kind of fall prey, if you will, to consumerism / capitalism / advertising, right? Where our parents were more prosperous later, right? They kind of were upwardly mobile. Some of them went to college. Some of them didn't. We were the first generation that largely went to college. And also, with Gen X, in a sort of defending my generation sort of way, maybe. Also, we were the first generation to deal with inflation at a large degree. Like, things became very expensive as we started to get old enough to be able to afford them. Where, you know, we were buying houses for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our parents were buying their first homes in the 70s for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. That's a big difference. So we already were kind of in the throes of materialism just because of the nature of the marketplace, the nature of the world we were coming into post-college, student loans, all of that kind of stuff. I think beyond that, for millennials and even subsequent generations now, I think there is a timelessness to the modern human era of consumerism, especially in the West, and advertising being so powerful. And maybe to some degree, no matter which way you slice it, but maybe in a sense of what the movie's saying, in that trying to assuage or fill in some sort of missing piece, some sort of deep down, deep-seated sense of dissatisfaction, and wanting to fill that in with stuff. You know what I mean? Which I think is a timeless thing. And I think that's what makes this such a fascinating type of a story, because it automatically has us self-analyzing. You know, we're turning the looking glass in at ourselves. And I think a lot of it is we're looking at it from an outside perspective as a viewer of a film, and we're like, oh, that's objectionable. Like, I don't want to fall prey to Madison Avenue. I don't want to be told to buy what I don't need. Why do I know what a Duvet cover is?
Right.
You know what I mean? But at the same time, there's something, I would argue, all of us, there's a little hypocrisy involved, because a lot of us, I think, due to just maybe, I would argue, basic human nature and how we were brought up in the modern age over the last 100 years or so, this is just a part of who we are now. You know what I mean? There's going to be some degree of that, however we accept it or reject it, you know, and that's up to each one of us as individuals. So I think that's the most fascinating component of that for me, is like inherently knowing there's something wrong with it, but also the hypocrisy involved for all of us, because to some degree, either the stuff, the things, the buying, the bank account probably does make us all happy to some degree, or we think it makes us happy to some degree. And kind of where does that treadmill stop and start? I don't know. But it's a fascinating question, and a really maybe an important part of being self-critical. And you know, who knows? Maybe the other point is, on the other side, flip side of the coin, maybe it's very tongue-in-cheek. I mean, this is coming from David Fincher. This guy cut his teeth and made a lot of money in the advertising world, working for huge advertising studios. I mean, I think Whedon and Kennedy did the advertising for this film. You know what I mean? So in collaboration with David Fincher. So how much of it is just kind of like you were saying before with nihilism? I would also argue maybe Dadaism, like everything is kind of like ridiculous. Mm-hmm. You know, who cares? At the end of the day, who cares? Like we're just running around this hamster wheel of asking these questions.
Pure
and we're
anarchy.
going to be doing the same thing in another 20 years.
Yeah.
And another 20 years.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And that works in the reverse, as we were saying, which is just how long. I mean, people have been asking these questions, and perhaps kickstands to the answer to quick kickstands thing is that we'll continue to ask them. And,
I think so.
And we'll have different answers at a different time that will probably seem as heedless and useless to future generations too.
Sure.
But it's not lost on me that it's true that we are so much further down the consumerist rabbit hole, and I'm incredibly troubled by it personally, but we all contribute to it. I just try not to live and die by materialism
stuff.
I've been really good about that, I think, but shit, we all accumulate and look for safety and reason and meaning and all of that in everything around us. So it's very human, and I think Fight Club is a very human movie, and I highly recommend it. If for some reason you made it through this and haven't seen it yet, it was on Amazon Prime, so that was cool. I didn't even have to pay for it, but
it's free.
Yeah, but you can check it out in other spots as well. Dagan, let's end as we always do every episode of Knockback with a dad joke.
All right, my friend. You know what the other thing I was thinking about, Kyle, with this film? That, you know, like a lot of the things we cover, it's pre 9/11, and this is pre 9/11 by a couple of years. So when Fight Club sort of evolves into Operation Mayhem, and it's this sort of corporate sabotage, corporate, terrorism sort of thing evolves. And it precedes 9/11 by a couple of years. It's interesting. It's really interesting that this piece of media existed a couple of years before that tragedy, especially with the ending of the movie with the collapsing skyscrapers and apartment buildings and stuff. It was really striking to me. And it reminded me, that's the type of thing that happens in a film or a TV show you're watching, and you automatically go to that part of your brain like, all right, quick, compute. Was this before 9/11 or after 9/11? And then the resulting thoughts based on the answer. It's like, wow, that's really, it makes me think of, I don't know if this is a morbid thought or if you could relate to this at all, Kyle, or any of you guys listening. It makes me automatically think of the people that were in those buildings that day, that they had probably seen this movie. You know what I mean? They had seen that happening on screen.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Became this real life tragedy. And it's not through the fault of anybody. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things. It's one of those coincidences, those cosmic coincidences. But it always reminds me of that. And I wonder if Fight Club came after, would they have done it the same way? You always wonder that.
Yeah, probably not. Not with the buildings, not with the plane scene, obviously. Yeah, I would agree.
Right, exactly. That's the other thing, the plane thing. Yeah, absolutely. All right, but to lighten it up, I like this dad joke.
Yeah,
I was very excited to find this one this morning. Kyle, which kind of bear is the most condescending?
Panda bear.
Oh! A panda. You actually kind of got it.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be something about him panda. I don't know. Yeah.
How dare you get my?
That's joke. 3 out of 192 I've gotten. So
not bad.
Not bad now. But that's 2 in 4 weeks or something. So
the last 2 were close. I feel like
I'm fresh off. Yeah. I'm on a win streak and I'm feeling myself now.
You're on a high.
Well, yes. Dagan, thank you for your time. Always good to see you.
So super fun.
Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of KnockBack and Last Stand Media. Remember, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. We couldn't do it without you over there. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow the channel on YouTube. You can subscribe on various podcast outlets like iTunes. Leave us nice reviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We appreciate you. We thank you. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.